Hey, I'm Danielle, and today we are talking about tough decisions in your career and trusting your gut. And as much as I love like a good tip 1, 2, 3 type of video, and as much as I actually do that sometimes, I kind of just want to have like a heart-to-heart little chat. I have been working on trusting my gut more over the years, whether that comes to decisions in my career or other parts of my life. But I kind of feel like this is actually a skill that you develop. It's one of those things where I really do think that if you trust your gut, it leads you in the direction that you're meant to go. And at the same time, like sometimes it's hard to read those sensations. So kind of what I've noticed over time is that it's like this subtle physical sensation. And I actually talked about this in a recent video where I was talking about designing your life and your career and just sort of thinking through different options for myself. And I always notice like this little subtle physical sensation. And I feel like over time I've been able to make that physical sensation more powerful and more like prominent. And I kind of feel like when I consider different options, like if I'm like thinking about going direction A or B, I sort of name it for a second and then just like feel in my torso whether it's sort of like a disappointment or a like just kind of like a no sort of feeling, or if it's like a yes, and it might like you might feel kind of like scared for a second, but it's sort of this expansive feeling rather than a contracting feeling. And I just think like over time, the more often you're like tuning in for like a millisecond just to see like what your body is saying, the more likely you'll be able to grow that capacity to pay attention to those signals. So I kind of feel like career decisions are hard for a couple reasons. First off, like personally, I just think decision making in general is hard because I don't know if you're like this, but I'm the type of person where like I just flip back and forth in my mind at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Like, I'm like, what if I did this, but then this would happen, and then this would happen, and then what if I did that? Well, I could choose this other thing, and then that would happen, but then here's the problem with that. And it's just like sort of this mental swarm. And I feel like the mental swarm gets me nowhere fast. And when I actually like take a second to think through the options and feel into them, it makes a lot of sense for me. So like with the video that I mentioned of thinking about these different like Odyssey plans, and if you're curious about what that is, definitely watch that video, I'll link it. If you're actually mapping out different possibilities, something that I found really, really helpful that I learned from someone named Christine Hassler, who does these amazing like coaching / counseling podcast sessions that are like live and anonymous, and it's super cool. But I've really found her material helpful and stuff. And she talks about being able to like fully step into and imagine a different option. So like, let's think about like, if you're considering going into 2 or 3 different industries and you're just really not sure what's right for you, and they're completely different, and you are not really sure what that gut instinct is saying, and maybe you also feel that mental swarm like me, what you can do is you can like actually write it on a physical sheet of paper. Or let's say you're like trying to move to different cities for different jobs, and you're like, should I go to Chicago, LA, or New York? All very different options. If you actually write that on a piece of paper and like put it on the floor and then step up to it and actually imagine what would it look like if I'm living here? Like, who would I connect with? What would my day-to-day be like? You know, what's the weather like or whatever? You're fully immersing yourself in that potential option, and it's gonna be more fleshed out than if you're just like jumping back and forth in your head and doing these like pro and cons lists that aren't fully thought out, but just bopping around in your head. So if you're struggling with a career decision right now and you're thinking of like path A or B, and you're just sort of like completely clueless as to what's the right decision for you, I promise if you write those 2 different options down on pieces of paper, 3 options, and you put them down, and you like step up to it, and for like 3 minutes, 5 minutes, actually imagine yourself taking that path, and then just notice whether you feel expansive or like you're contracting. It's kind of like your instinct knows what's right for you, and it will tell you. Now, the other thing that I've noticed about gut instincts is that it usually, like when I'm getting a signal from my gut, I tend to have more logical reasons that I should choose option A when my gut is telling me option B. Like, let me think of an example for this. Here's one. So a couple years ago, I was living the gig life and doing a bunch of different jobs at once. I had actually 5 different jobs, which is crazy. And I got this instinct to consider a full-time job. And while I was getting like a lot of variety from the gigs and everything, like I just sort of had this unexplainable feeling of like I should get a full-time job. And you know, it turns out that with the pandemic hitting and everything, my gigs would have gone away. And like I couldn't have anticipated that. I couldn't have anticipated that like teaching yoga was one of my jobs, that I wouldn't be able to like teach in-person classes for a little while. I think that in the situation I was in, like pretty much all of my work with my gigs would have gone away pretty suddenly, versus with my full-time job, I came on board December 2019, and then, you know, March 2020, we all know what happened then. But it kind of worked out to my advantage without me realizing, and just being able to keep steady work. So, you know, sometimes like we just have an unexplainable feeling, or even like there's more logical reasons that go with one option, but like you're just being drawn towards the other one. And let me tell you, trust that, because it always works out in the end in my experience. So I have a bit of a confession to make about a recent decision that was a gut decision and hasn't totally played out yet. And I'm hoping it'll work out like the other scenarios that ultimately ended well, but we will see. I have been building a business around strengths assessment. So I got trained in this specific strengths assessment a few years ago, and it's basically for talent selection. So a company who's looking to hire someone will be sort of in their final round and have us do strengths assessments with those people to see who really is the best fit on the skill and strength level. And I like doing this on the side, and I realized that like I was attempting to build this business around these strengths assessments and wanting to potentially, you know, transition to that full time ultimately. And I kind of just felt like not totally bought into that path for some reason. And I was like, I don't really know why I'm not feeling this. It's not like a fear of doing something, you know, new and being outside my comfort zone. Like I can kind of tell the difference personally. I was like, there's just something about this that's not clicking for me. And one, I think, is just because I enjoy doing it part-time, but I don't necessarily know if I'd want to do it full-time. But the other piece is I felt like it was the safe option for me. So like something about that path wasn't feeling right, and I later realized why. And it was because I felt like that path made sense for me, but it wasn't really something that I was fully excited about building. It was kind of like I had all the pieces. I knew how to take someone through this process. I knew I liked strengths and strengths assessments, and I just could see like sort of most of the staircase of how I would build that out and how I would go for that path. But the fact of the matter is that like I feel like there's sort of something else out there for me, and I don't really know what that is yet. And I do feel like there's a couple projects that I'm working on that sort of feel like more the right direction, even though I don't really understand what that direction will be. So it's just one of those things where like what I was doing with the strengths assessments really made sense, and like through my day job I actually have access to that sort of audience of like startups and small businesses who would be able to use that service. So it just like logically made sense for me to take that path. But like a lot of times what's really meant for us is not the logical thing, and is not the thing that makes sense, and is not the thing that we have all the pieces for. So we'll see what's next. Yeah, I thought that was interesting. I'm very much so in the thick of this, so I can definitely share more as I'm sort of discovering what is actually the direction that I'm attempting to go in. But like I said, I'm still in the thick of it and figuring it out. So I hope that is making sense. I am very sleep deprived right now, so I hope you're picking up what I'm putting down. But the fact of the matter is, if you are trying to make a decision in your career, in your life, and you're having a little bit of trouble with it, if you just start to notice those sensations and start to sort of like build that relationship with your gut instinct, I guarantee that you'll start to notice more and more either an expansive feeling or a contracting type of feeling as you're thinking through these different options. So definitely test that out, give it a try, put different options if you've got them down on pieces of paper, step fully into what that would look like, and just see how you feel. And yeah, trust your gut. And we will leave it at that. Thank you so much for sitting here. We had a little chat about trusting your gut and making decisions in your career. If you like this topic, if you want to hear more, definitely give it a thumbs up so that I know what kinds of videos you like to see. And then definitely subscribe so you get more videos popping up in your feed from me. And then I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.